This is definitely the pinnacle of women's survival at sea. A woman was stranded on a small boat due to a hurricane and survived alone for a full 41 days with very little food and water. Tami is a girl who loves to travel the world. This time, she came to a new place, Tahiti, and first found a job repairing boats. She hopes to save some money. After that, she plans to start her next journey. One day, while working on the shore, she saw Richard returning by boat. Seeing Richard handling a fish, Tami offered him a bucket of ice. Richard wanted to invite her to eat sashimi, but Tami refused because she is a vegetarian. Richard invited her to have dinner on the boat, saying he would be willing to make her a vegetarian feast, and Tami did not refuse. This boat was built by Richard himself, and Tami was very surprised. Richard usually likes to sail alone at sea, although during the voyage he encounters various situations like sunburn, insomnia, seasickness, and hunger. But once the voyage is over, it feels like being reborn. Richard really enjoys this feeling, perhaps because he also loves sailing at sea. The two of them have endless topics to talk about. The next day, they went sailing together and went diving on a small island. Their relationship gradually deepened, as if they had found their other half in life. After a while, the ship was covered with happy photos of the two of them. Richard planned to take them on a world tour. While they were shopping for supplies, they ran into Richard's friend. The friend invited them for coffee, saying he wanted Richard to do him a favor. They were about to return to London and hoped Richard could sail their yacht to San Diego. The offer was $10,000 plus 2 first-class return tickets. Faced with such an enticing offer, Richard readily agreed. Tami wasn't very happy because his home was in San Diego, and he didn't want to go back so soon. If you want to go, go by yourself. Richard's words changed his mind. I've traveled half the world to meet you, and I don't want to miss you. The two of them went to their friend's yacht to check things out. The friend told them that his father was ill, so they needed to rush back. Seeing their friend's yacht, they couldn't help but marvel at how luxurious it was. They also wrote a letter to their mom, who hadn't written in a long time. 1 month. He was going home and introduced his boyfriend Richard to his mom. To go to San Diego, they had to cross the Pacific Ocean, a journey of over 4,000 miles. The two of them enjoyed the beautiful sunset on the boat. At night, Richard played the guitar and sang. In a moment of deep emotion, he proposed to Tami. Although the ring was made of string, they happily accepted. The next day, a broadcast warned of a Category 4 hurricane at sea. But Richard thought they were still over 1,000 miles away from the hurricane, and by the time the boat passed through, the hurricane should have dissipated. They thought it would be safer to change course, and Richard agreed to the suggestion. However, they didn't expect the hurricane to move so quickly. Before they could get far, the storm was already upon them. They needed to take down the sails. But the waves were getting bigger and bigger, and they couldn't operate normally. At this time, a huge wave approached. A man and a woman were sailing across the Pacific Ocean but unfortunately encountered a Category 4 hurricane. Seeing a huge wave approaching, Richard told Tami to go into the cabin first. Just as Tami entered the cabin, a huge wave hit, capsizing the boat. Richard was thrown off the boat and hit his head on the mast. He lost consciousness on the spot. After some time, Tami woke up in the cabin filled with seawater. Looking at everything in front of him, he was a bit dazed. Once he slightly regained his senses, he started shouting Richard's name, but no one responded. When he climbed onto the deck, the boat was already in ruins. He quickly went to check the safety rope, but there was nothing on it. Tami shouted in despair, searching everywhere with binoculars but still couldn't see Richard's shadow. He sent out a distress signal using the radio, but it seemed the radio had long been broken. Tami lay on the deck in despair. Under the scorching sun, Tami woke up again. He saw a small boat in the distance and noticed the lifeboat on the ship was gone. Richard might be on the small boat. He prepared to sail over, but the engine was already broken. The mast lying in the sea was dragging the boat and constantly hitting the hull. If not dealt with in time, the boat might soon sink. While cutting the wires on the mast, Tami accidentally fell into the water. After struggling to get out from under the sail, the boat had already drifted far away with the current. Fortunately, Tami swam quickly and climbed back onto the boat. First, he did a simple repair on the damaged hull, then he pumped out the water from the cabin, set up a small mast again, and put on a small sail. They jumped up with joy. The boat could be sailed again. He steered the boat near the lifeboat, tied a safety rope, and then jumped into the water to swim towards the lifeboat. To his surprise, he found Richard was still alive. Tami rescued him onto the boat. Richard's leg was severely injured, so Tami bandaged it first. His ribs were fractured and deformed, making it difficult to breathe. Tami had to do everything. Through calculations and measurements, they found they were drifting north and had seriously deviated from their course. Tami thought they were doomed. The worst thing in an accident is having negative thoughts, but fortunately, Richard encouraged him to keep going. Under normal circumstances, it would take them 25 days to reach San Diego, but in this situation, it might take months. Tami discovered that heading left towards Hawaii would be faster, like some navigators did before. However, many sailors couldn't achieve this, let alone he wasn't a sailor. In this situation, they could only try to survive. With hope to survive, he turned the bow and set off. Then Tami went to the cabin to gather supplies. What does it feel like to stitch a wound without any anesthesia? Due to the small boat encountering a Category 4 hurricane, many things on the boat were long gone. Without any anesthesia, the woman stitched her own wound and then repaired the freshwater equipment on the boat, tidying up the mess in the cabin. They gathered all the supplies on the boat, and that's all they had to eat. Since she was a vegetarian, even a jar of peanut butter made her very happy. On the 5th day of survival, Tami discovered they had deviated 60 miles off course. It turned out there was an outrigger and sail hanging from the bottom of the boat, which not only slowed them down but also changed their direction. Tami jumped into the water and pulled it off with all his might. On the 10th day, while searching the boat, Tami found a bottle of sunscreen. He quickly squeezed some out and applied it to his face, and also put some on Richard on the deck. Due to not receiving timely treatment, Richard's abdomen had changed color, and the wound on his leg had worsened. The fresh water on the boat was also running low, and the entire boat was left with some canned food, but not enough for a week's supply. Richard thinks they need more protein, so he suggests Tami go fishing in the sea. But Tami is a fast food enthusiast and doesn't want to kill. After Richard's repeated requests, Tami decides to give it a try, but fishing isn't that easy. After several attempts, he didn't catch a single fish. Fortunately, a heavy rain came, and Tami quickly set out all the containers to collect water. On the 18th day of survival, Tami found a few bottles of wine under the sofa. They say wine is the essence of grain, at least it can give them some energy. In the evening, Tami played the guitar to pass the time. Richard said, "I really wish you hadn't met me, then you wouldn't be in this situation." Tami replied, "Then we wouldn't have those memories. I'm willing to give anything for that." On the 29th day of survival, at night, a ship passed by. Tami quickly fired a flare, but the ship didn't stop and disappeared instead. In fact, there was no ship, it was just Tami's hallucination. He was exhausted and severely dehydrated, leading to mental instability. On the 30th day of survival, Richard's leg was almost dead and rotting, and there was only a little pigeon left on the boat. But they were still 690 miles away from Hawaii. On the 3rd day of survival, the two lay on the deck holding hands, watching the sunset, and Tami kept telling Richard stories from the past. Richard encouraged the weak Tami to stand up. Tami said, "I have to let you go." When Tami sat up from the deck, there was no one behind him. In fact, it had always been just him. There was no one on the lifeboat at the time, it was all Tami's hallucination. It was this hallucination that kept him going for so long. Holding Richard's clothes, he felt he had to survive. This time, he successfully caught a big fish, cut it with a small knife, and ate it raw, which kept him going for a while. On the 41st day of survival, a pigeon flew onto the boat. Ordinary land birds can't fly far. He picked up the binoculars and saw land not far away and a ship. They quickly fired a flare, and finally, the ship sailed towards him. They waved excitedly, and he was rescued. When he took a bite of the apple, it was a long-lost feeling. The movie, Adrift, ends here. This film is based on a true story, where 24-year-old Tami and his 3-year-old fiancé Richard encounter a hurricane at sea, experience life and death separation, a long wait, and despair, and after drifting at sea for 41 days, they are finally rescued. After being saved, Tami also fell into a depression. He lost faith in life, but he eventually realized that the only way to overcome the shadows of the past was to bravely face the darkness he once experienced. To this day, he has not stopped sailing. Alright, if you want to see more great movie explanations, please follow me. Bye bye.
Yeah.